I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast, and we are joined yet again by a very good friend to the show. That is Introibo. He writes a very good blog over at Introibo two.blogspot.com. I think that's it. I should have pulled that up before I did this, but I will attach a link anyway in this video. You can go over and he publishes every Monday, and it's always fascinating and good reading. I don't think I've ever seen one that I didn't enjoy and didn't learn something from. He covers all sorts of things from occultism, of course, and all church. I don't know if you did. Do you do church theology? Not so much, I suppose. I guess church.
Oh, I do. I get into a little bit of everything.
A little bit of theology. Yeah, okay. So you really kind of do it all anyway. So anyway, with this long rambling introduction, we've been doing a series for the last several months covering occultism in culture, society, movies, radio, all sorts of different things. I've learned a lot. I know our listeners have as well. I've had many people come to me and tell me that they love the shows with Introibo and that we need to keep doing them. So here we are. We're doing another one. And today we're talking about a topic that I know very, very little about, and that is Catholic astrology. So Introibo, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, astrology itself has been around, as we know, for many, many years, centuries actually, going back before the time of Christ, 3,000 years before the time of Christ, to be precise. And it is, as we'll see soon enough, pagan. There was a while when there wasn't a clear distinction between astrology and astronomy. They were basically two different ways of expressing the same thing of the planets and the stars and things like that. But there became a distinct occult division between that which is now known as astrology and which is astronomy, which is a pure science. Astronomy is a science. Astrology is not. It is occult and it has no validity to it, other than to get people. Usually people start by astrology and get into other parts of the occult. It's one of the biggest gateways into the occult, that and the Ouija board. Two of the biggest gateways to getting full blown into the occult. I would also add probably horror movies to that, those three. And there's now a movement actually called Catholic astrology, which they're trying to say that it's actually okay under certain circumstances. And as I'm going to show, that's nonsense. So first, let's go back to, well, the beginning. Astrology is known today in the West, started about 3,000 years ago, 3000 BD in Mesopotamia. So it's 3000 BC, it's been around a long, long time, 5,000 years, right? And the Babylonian belief system held that the celestial bodies were gods that influenced all of life. Astrology during this time was used by pagan priests who attempted to tell the fortune or the future, that is, of their countries, as opposed to today's practice of casting personal horoscopes. You'll see it's in all papers and so that what's your sign?
Yeah.
People, if you're Pisces or if you're Capricorn or Gemini or Cancer, what have you. And they want to see if you're compatible, or they want to see if what's going to happen today. And some people look at it for fun, and I think that's tempting fate. But
I had a colleague ask me that the other day. Asked me, "Hey, what's your sign?" Honestly, I always forget it, so I couldn't even tell them which one it was. But I think they were kind of half joking, but it was kind of like that. Oh, well, this sign means that you are this, or this, and it's like, nah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds pretty. I mean, either right. I've always kind of thought with horoscopes, I think most of them are just purely silly. It's just, hey, here, just throwing up mumbo jumbo words that someone could pull something from that they can obtain to them, pertain to themselves. But I guess it makes sense that if you start dealing with that kind of fortune telling type of a thing, it kind of has to be a cult, I guess.
And here's a couple of scary facts. Do you know that over 200 of the 300 major Fortune 500 companies employ professional, so-called professional astrologers?
What?
Yeah.
No way.
They do.
Okay.
JP Morgan had an astrologer, and they said, do millionaires always use astrologers? He said, no, billionaires do.
Okay.
Ooh, he didn't do anything without consulting astrological charts. So,
Interesting.
Nancy Reagan the wife of former President Ronald Reagan here in the United States. She had a professional astrologer who used to come to the White House and make all kinds of predictions for her. And
Oof.
Barack Obama was a big believer in astrology. So it's gotten into just like the other things we've spoken about. It's pervasive. It's ubiquitous. The occult explosion, cult revival, and astrology is particularly insidious, and we're seeing that all over the place. As
Well,
like I said, when you have major people in power using astrology, that's scary.
well, and I'm really curious to see how you can get into this Catholic astrology, because I mean, to me, it just seems like this is fairly obvious that you can't, again, you can't try to read signs from nature. I mean, am I crazy in thinking that that is very clearly not Christian or Catholic, or am I missing something here?
No, you're not missing anything. You're right. But believe it or not, it comes from, I'll get into it in a moment. It comes from uh, Steve Skojek. I used to spell
Hmm.
his name, the S, the two S's with the dollar sign, because everything, you had to pay for everything. Please do this. He was making close to 200,000 a year off that
Wow.
website, and now
Wow.
he's an atheist.
Right.
And the person who took it over, one of one of the people that they hired to be their point person, so to speak, on the occult, an expert on the occult, is himself an occultist and pushing this Catholic astrology.
Oh boy.
So I'll tell you all about that in a second. The modern day revival of astrology began in the early 20th century due to the writings of three people. The Satanist Aleister Crowley, who died in 1947, wrote a book called Astrology. Alice Bailey, another occultist, who authored a three-volume work called A Treatise on the Seven Rays. And most influential was Carl Jung. It's Jung, but pronounced like Jung. And he is a very influential, one of the fathers of modern day psychology.
Hmm.
And he himself was an occultist. They actually used astrology in tandem with this theory of what's called synchronicity. It was also the name of an album uh, by a rock band called The Police, which was heavily into astrology and that type of thing. So synchronicity means meaningful coincidences, and has worked with symbol and myths. Were influential in the development of the North American humanist school of astrology, which emphasizes psychology and therapy, and it's called astrotherapy. There's actually something you can go to, astrotherapy.
Okay.
So the
You just
so-called
stare at the stars, or
they're at the stars, I guess. I don't want to find out what that's about.
right.
The so-called New Age movement, which began in the United States in the 1960s and spread quickly to Europe, incorporated and helped legitimize astrology. You're not considered a nut. If you were to say, I believe in astrology, most cocktail parties, whatever, people are not going to think anything of it really. Whereas if you were to say things like, I go to seances, you may raise quite a few
Hmm.
eyebrows, but
Right.
this is considered actually legit. And in striving to legitimize astrology and make it seem scientific, there's an ongoing attempt to make it square with the theories of certain schools of psychology, in particular those that have Jungian principles. The New Yorker magazine references a 2017 Pew Research poll which relates that 30% of the United States population as of 2017 believes that astrology is true.
Huh.
And the magazine notes that it is on the upswing in its popularity among millennials. It's in its penetration into, this is the direct quote I lifted from the New Yorker. In its penetration into our shared lexicon, astrology is a little like psychoanalysis once was. At mid-century, you might have heard talk of id, ego, or superego at a party. Now it's common to hear someone explain herself by way of sun, moon, and rising stars. It's not just what you hear, it's who's saying it. People who aren't kooks or climate change deniers, who see no contradiction between using astrology and believing in science. The change is fueling a new generation of practitioners. The popularity of astrology is often explained as the result of the decline of organized religion and the rise of economic precariousness, and as one aspect of a larger turn to new age modalities. That's a cult, new age modalities. Then there's the matter of political panic. In times of crisis, it is often said people search for something to believe. And that's a quote from the October 28th issue of the New Yorker magazine of 2019. And it was referencing the 2017 poll. So astrology is something that is, again, taken seriously. It's based on the assumption that the stars and the planets mysteriously influence people's birth lives. People's lives, well, actually, people's lives based on their birth is sometimes called like their birth life and your life based on your birth. It teaches that this influence begins, of course, at birth and continues throughout your life. This is because the heavenly bodies allegedly influence to determine our future, and astrology claims to be able to read how the planets, stars, and etc. Those things in the sky affect people's lives and offer helpful counsel about how to act in the present and prepare for the future. As an ancient pagan system of divination, which is attempting to predict the future, astrology easily traps people in occult practices and occult philosophy. So that, and it sounds erudite because there's a lot of things you're going to hear when people start talking, when people who are deeply into astrology talk about this stuff, they actually sound intelligent. They actually sound like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because they use all these phrases and you're like, well, gee, maybe there's something to it. So for example, the zodiac, I'm sure everyone's heard that, is an imaginary belt, so-called, of sky comprising the 12 astrological signs that the ancients illustrated by mythological figures, both human and animal. In other words, the mythological signs of the zodiac are overlaid upon actual clusters or constellations of stars. And importantly, the signs, so-called, exist irrespective of the actual positions of the constellations to which they are said to refer. So there are 12 signs of the zodiac known as sun signs. Everyone is said to be born under one of these 12 signs: Pisces the fish, Leo the lion, Gemini the twins, and so forth. Astrologers often group the signs according to psychological aspects or types. Now, you also have the word houses will be used. You're in the house of this or the house of that. There are 12 divisions of the zodiac that is said to correspond symbolically to every area of your life. So literally, people can have a horoscope reading about anything in their life.
Mm.
The houses are also imaginary, and the planets are said to travel through the houses, influencing each area of life as they do so. The horoscope is the map of the heavens for the time of birth or for any time thereafter. On the horoscope or the chart, the astrologer plots the positions of the planets, signs, and houses. And then from this map, after interpreting numerous complex rules, which are ad hoc rules, no one knows where these rules came from, many of which vary from one astrologer to another and what type of astrology they practice. The astrologer gives you a reading. Now, the real name for reading, that's the common parlance. It's really called a delineation. And that's the name that the professional astrologers will call it. Well, according to your delineation. All right. This is an interpretation resulting from the combination of two or more astrological principles. And again, these principles are made up for many years. Analysis or synthesis is the complete interpretation of the whole chart. And then there's the concept of rulership, that you'll hear that too. Astrologers believe that each planet rules a sign of the zodiac. For example, Mercury rules or influences Geminis and Virgos. Venus is said to rule Tauruses and Libras. Saturn rules Capricorn, Neptune rules Pisces, and so on. In addition, the signs and their ruling planets are related to certain houses. And the other important term is called an aspect, refers to the angles between the planets based on the plots in the horoscope chart. So certain angles are interpreted as good and other angles are bad, and others are called neutral and acquire their goodness or badness from other astrological indicators. So, for example, two planets are at 90 degrees to each other. It's called a square. That's a bad influence. But if it's on 120 degrees to each other, it's considered a good influence. So even the planets are considered good and bad. For example, Saturn and Mars are considered bad planets, and Venus and Jupiter are good planets. But if you ever ask an astrologer, what's the basis for calling these angles of planets good and bad, they either A, don't know, or they just say that it came from, so-and-so back in the ancient days. So they have no rhyme or reason. Or I've literally, emailed some astrologers to ask, like, what does that mean? And when you say it, and their answers, they either said they didn't know or they gave me different answers. I emailed 4 of them. I got 3 different answers, and one said he didn't know.
I
So this
mean,
is
to me, it all sounds like sci-fi. I mean, it sounds like a bad plot to a science fiction book or something like that.
and you would think that and you think that people would uh, not take this seriously. But when you have people who are actually following this, when you have world leaders,
Right.
another one, Putin uses astrology.
Wow.
So I mean, this is something, again, you think intelligent people who are using something that is very occult and silly if you think about it. So as to Catholic astrology, where this comes in now, I think that most people claiming to be Catholic will hopefully steer away from that. A Vatican II sect will steer away from it. But now, if you go on the 1 Peter 5, back in February of last year, there was a guy named Michael J.B., and it was initials for the last J period, B period. I guess that's the initial for his middle name and his last name. I'll just call him Michael. He wrote an article entitled "What is the Occult?" And this is what it says for his bio. Michael J.B. writes about the influence of the occult on history, society, and how it crops up in some of the most unexpected places. Around 2019, he began a prodigal son type return to the church. He's talking about the Vatican II sect. He is now a Latin Mass enthusiast and Marian devotee. He was also engrossed in the study of a wide variety of topics that unveil the enmity of the esoteric traditions such as Freemasonry and Theosophy towards all things Catholic. Last but not least, Michael is currently writing a book on the aforementioned topics and is happy to be part of 1 Peter's 5 updated mission to unite the clans being like sedevacantists and recognize and resist and conservative V2 sect as if such were possible. All right. The occult
Right.
does indeed crop up on some of the most unexpected places. I find the occult, and if you read my blog piece this week, you'll see it takes me by surprise still. And it's in MJB. It's in Michael's own personal life. I went to his personal website, which, by the way, is called rockstaresoterica.com. And this is on 1 Peter 5, which is supposed to be that conservative Vatican II sect. And so I went there, and he has a bunch of videos, and the video was called TCA 1.0, Astrology Forbidden in Scripture and Tradition with a question mark. All right, and it's a free video sample. You don't have to pay for it. If you want to listen, if anybody out there wants to listen to a refined, cultured, erudite millennial making cogent arguments, don't watch the video. You're not going to get that. What you're going to get instead is, I feel like I wasted approximately 20 minutes of over an hour and 20 minutes of my life listening to basically an uncouth, inarticulate, pseudo-educated dolt who actually used profanity, slang, and made an obscene gesture at the camera.
Oh boy.
So this is what you're getting. All right. And he uses a whiteboard, and all he does, I'm surprised they haven't made him, professor of moral theology at the Vatican II Seminary.
Good point. Yeah.
And so he's there and he's talking about all this stuff, writing on his whiteboard. And the second video I watched after that was no better, except for the fact it was only 1 hour and 6 minutes of vulgar nonsense. His bottom line is this. This is what he says. There is acceptable astrology for Catholics and unacceptable astrology. It kind of reminds me, going back to the whole Harry Potter business of good witches and bad witches. How about a good abortion and a bad abortion? There is no such thing. Nothing is. So acceptable astrology, he says, is a catalyst and a tool to help you sort things out in your life and point you towards God. And he offers his services as a Catholic astrologer, doing natal chart readings, meaning birth chart readings. And you need only pay him $36 an hour for a reading. And you can spend up to 3 hours with him on Skype for $108. And he writes, you can start off with an hour, and if you wanted to go longer, you can send the rest of the payment afterwards. I can usually cover everything in a chart within an hour and a half, but this can vary depending on how much detail you prefer. If it's more detailed, then perhaps 2 sessions are best in order to cover the entire chart. I am also happy to do a question and answer discussion on any research or teach my astrology system for the same rates as listed above. If you are interested in recurring sessions, then I'm happy to work out a reduced rate with you. All right, so he assures you that for any Catholic suspicious of Catholic astrology, please read through his blog post, and he'll have the necessary resources, even those by Catholic Answers, explaining all this. So I did just that. I went through all the stuff, and I will explain what he gets wrong, which is pretty much everything. His blog post cites to another website that blasphemously asserts that St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Albert the Great were astrologers.
Wow.
Not they were not astrologers. They were astronomers, astrologers, and they were acceptable astrologers. And this is not at all correct. So how does he get to the point of view that St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Albert the Great, among other Catholics, can support or did support astrology? Well, if you go back, he says that, remember, his claim is that good astrology is okay as long as it doesn't do a couple of things. Number one, it can't attempt to foretell the future, the mortal sin of divination. And second, it is acknowledged that there are forces, the planets and the stars exert on people, and that this condemnation and that this force, these forces that come upon you can influence, but not absolutely predict what you're going to do for the future.
Okay.
So that's what he's saying. But here's what the angelic doctor taught in context. First, in Latin, occultus meant anything that was hidden. And I said the word occult comes from that which is hidden, like an occult blood sample in your stool. It means you can't see it, but it was there, and it was found out by some medical instruments. Anything people didn't know or understand was called occult or hidden at that time. It didn't specifically mean something that was evil or pagan. So when Aquinas wrote his treatise entitled On the Occult Workings of Nature or Concerning the Causality of Heavenly Bodies, he wasn't talking about getting in touch with spirits and things like they're doing now, or predicting the future, or all these other things that occult stands for. So these weren't automatically contrary to the faith, and occult had a neutral meaning in the 13th century. Just because people didn't understand something didn't mean it was automatically evil. I don't understand, advanced calculus, but it's not evil. It wasn't until about the 1600s that Isaac Newton proposed that there was an invisible force causing objects with mass to attract to each other, and he called it gravity. Now, Aquinas held that stones fall towards the earth because they contain some elements of the earth. A stone, for example, he says in his Occult Workings of the Nature, a stone, for example, is moved towards the center of the earth according to the property of the earth dominant in it. Now, he was dealing with science of the 13th century.
Right.
Okay. What kind of science did they really have back then? Not much. And Aquinas knew some things could be predicted with certainty, even as astrologers foretell an eclipse. Okay. That can be foretold, but it's not really predicting the future. You're just knowing how things are going to line up. All right. And again, that's from his work on the occult workings of nature. Aquinas knew that some things could be predicted with certainty, and stars and planets exert influence on physical bodies. He said in the Summa Theologica, the natural forces of natural bodies result from their substantial forms, which they acquire through the influence of heavenly bodies. We therefore, through the same influence, they acquire certain active forces. And since the stars influence the physical world, Aquinas held that astrologers considering the stars can know and foretell things concerning rain and drought.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can tell, for example, by the moon, the tides. That is scientific.
Right.
And it's not a stretch to say, well, maybe rains and droughts. But he's not talking about the future free actions of human beings.
Right. Or my personality, right?
Yeah, your personality, who you should marry, what you should be doing on Monday, and things like that. So they can influence the choices we make. For the majority of men follow their passions, he says, which are the movements of the sensitive appetites, in which movements of the heavenly bodies can cooperate. And accordingly, it is not called divination if a man foretells things that happen of necessity, or in the majority of instances, for the like can be foreknown by human reason. And since most people follow their passions, Aquinas concluded that astrologers are able to foretell the truth in the majority of cases, especially in a general way, but not in particular cases, for nothing prevents man resisting his passions by his own free will given by God, from the Summa Theologica. So purely natural things like an eclipse, being guided by the North Star to find your way home if you're out in the woods somewhere, right? They are legitimate. He was mistaken about stars and planets having causal influence on people's actions due to his limited scientific knowledge of the day. Likewise, he was wrong about delayed ensoulment, largely due to the limited biological knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's still considered at any point it to be life. It had the potential of having a soul, even though it didn't have a soul. It was made by God. So yes, he would be against abortion, even with the idea of delayed ensoulment. But delayed ensoulment came from the biology at that time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so again, he's not calling on spirit guides. He's not claiming that he knows your personality. He's not claiming he knows who you should marry or when your kid's going to be successful or not, depending upon his birth. He's not doing any of that. All right. And as far as astrology is science, there isn't any as to how it works today. And what about St. Albert the Great? Well, his name was brought up too at 1 Peter 5, St. Albert the Great. Well, what he says here, it sounds like it was something written by a New Age hippie. Listen to this. And if the bull, the maiden, or the horned goat are engraved upon stone by reason of the triplicity of the earth and south, they are cold and dry so far as their effects are concerned. Hence they are said to cure the wearers of fainting fits and hot infirmities. Then they incline their wearers towards religious devotion and Ward County occupations such as agriculture and the planting of vineyards and gardens. Again, it sounds like, what is this man talking about?
Right.
Well, the Catholic Encyclopedia, believe it or not, will give you an easy answer. And you don't have to go, again, this is not a deep theological work, the Catholic Encyclopedia, but even that explains it. It says, many legends have been circulated which attribute to the power of a magician or sorcerer to St. Albert the Great. He examined these legends to sift the truth from the false and exaggerated stories. Other biographers content themselves with noting the fact that Albert's proficiency in the physical science was the foundation on which the fables were constructed. He expressed contempt for everything that savored of enchantment or the art of magic. What he said is that there were many false texts ascribed to him. This is the Catholic Encyclopedia. There are many false texts ascribed to him because he was interested in certain fables. So because he was interested in these fables, they were attributed to him wrongfully.
Mm-hmm.
That he taught astronomy is conceded. And it could be used as Aquinas taught based on limited scientific knowledge. But that he thought any more of it is denied. So that's basically what he did. He wrote some esoteric stuff based on stories he was examining.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, these stories, they said, he was the one that said these nonsensical astrological type stories, and it wasn't. It was him making comments on them, and his comments were fully Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So it has nothing to do with, so it has no, it's false for Michael to assert that St. Thomas Aquinas approved of astrology in any form. Yeah.
Sorry, it just how important is it to realize again, and I'm sure we've probably talked about this before, how careful we have to be when we're taking our information from some guy on the internet, right? And I think that's, and of course you can do that. I mean, you and I both also produce content on the internet, so it can be done, but oof, don't just take if someone just says, hey, this is what this is what St. Thomas Aquinas said, don't just take them for their word. That's not how this works. Someone could have, purposely misattributed it, or, maybe even accidentally. And I think that's how a lot of these things, a lot of our stupid society, I suppose, the dumb people in the world, is because they take a lot of their information the little information that they have from the internet, and a lot of it's just not true.
Absolutely. And, even with my own, I tell my readers, check my sources. You want to go ahead, check my sources, and you don't have to take my word for anything. You can check it out. And again, I'll also say when I'm saying something that is an opinion, this is just my opinion. I'll say that as a layman.
Right.
Take it or leave it. But you have a lot of people, and the word comes from the Catholic Church, pontificating, because that's what they're doing. And they're pontificating that, this is the case. This guy, Michael J.B., definitely pontificates that what he has is absolutely true, and it's not to be questioned. Uh, and that's how when people present themselves like that, you have to be especially wary.
Hmm.
I know that I don't know a lot. I really don't. I'm just trying to make my Catholic best way I can through these times of the great apostasy. I don't have any. Somebody asked me something about the Sede privationism, thesis versus the
Right.
sedevacantism, and I'm like, look, it's possible. It's possible. I've seen some. Is the thesis possible? Yeah. I've always held that it's possible. I believe there was back in when John Paul the First, Luciani was elected. He had what I thought was the biggest uh, boost for that thesis that if there's a material pope and if he recants, he could become the true pope type of thing.
Hmm.
And why I never rule it out. I'm still a garden variety, regular, plain, no frills sedevacanist, but I'm open to it because what happened there, Father DePaul received a letter, special delivery from John Paul the First,
Well,
and it asked him to come to the Vatican for a high appointment so that he could be in charge of a commission to scrap the Novus Bogus and put back the Mass of old.
well,
I saw it. All right. So now, you're not going to be calling on Father DePaul if you're a modernist.
right.
That's the last person you're going to. And so he actually had his bag. He was packing his bags when news of his death came out.
Wow.
And he told me to the day he himself passed away that John Paul the First was murdered because he had found the Masonic infiltration in the banks with Paul Marcinkus
Hmm.
and all these other things. And if you read the book by David Yallop, In God's Name, it was definitely when he found the Masons. I mean, at 33, he had no major health problems, and all of a sudden he's dead. And it was right after he decided he was going to try to get rid of the Masonic influence, especially in the bank, and he was going to get rid of what he perceived as the liberal, quote unquote, influences in the Vatican. I guess a code word for modernism. Is it possible he became a true pope? And maybe.
Interesting.
And that's the reason I don't rule it out. I don't rule it out. So, when people I don't have the answers. Father Paul would say, I don't have the answers to this stuff. I'm just trying to make my way through as like everybody else. So I don't know. I don't know a lot of things. I'm just trying to make my way through best I can. And I go by the guidance of the church, as we all should, and try to make our best way using what we do know. I do know, and I will say for a fact, there is absolutely no way that Bergoglio can be the Pope. Right?
Right.
There's certain things that I do know, and I will, I'll die on that one. He's not the Pope, never was, and well, who knows? Could he become one? I mean, that would truly be a miracle on the road to Damascus. But
Right.
guess anything's possible. Where there's life, there's hope. So who knows? But that's the point I wanted to make. I'm sorry I got a little bit off topic there, Kevin. But
No, I just wanted to say that that was the greatest off the rails 3 minutes that I've ever heard. That was truly one of the most interesting, fascinating 3 minutes ever. That was totally not part of the topic. That really, wow, I'm totally floored right now. I think we need to have a whole podcast talking about that entire topic. What an incredible person Father DePaul must have been. Just blows my mind. Anyway, I guess we probably should get back to our topic, but I'm pretty floored over here. That is fascinating.
if nothing else, I'll tell you the time I spent with the approximately 24 years I spent with Father DePaul were the best years of my life, and he was one incredible human being. Seriously, who knows where I'd be without him? And not a week goes by that I don't miss him a lot. So, with that, I'll get back into the topic.
Sure.
So, what about science? What about There's people, and Michael JB also talks about the science of astrology. Well, is there science? Now, I used to be a New York City science teacher. I had tenure. I worked for 5 years for the New York City Board of Education, and I taught middle school science. I have a master's degree in science education, so I know a little bit more than the average guy about how science works.
Hmm.
There's a very small niche where science validates the effects of heavenly bodies on the earth. I said that already. For example, the high and the low tides is affected by the moon. That's undeniably true. All right. Navigation using stars. That's true. Any person who pilots a ship, a captain of a ship will tell you that's true. The time to harvest crops is true also.
Hmm.
That is true. So Aquinas was talking, we talked about rains and droughts. He wasn't too far off. The angelic doctor was, there's a reason why he's considered one of the two greatest minds in the church, the other being St. Alphonsus Liguori. So outside this narrow range of readily admitted astronomical influence, the claimed effects of astrology, Catholic or otherwise, have zero scientific evidence. I'm going to say that again, zero scientific evidence. So whenever a scientific hypothesis or theory is proposed, it is subjected to careful testing to see if the results of the testing fit the theory. Now, you have to understand that science has certain terminology, just like in theology. A lot of people think that a theory becomes a law. That's totally untrue. All
Hmm.
right, a theory is simply what we think is the best explanation of X given information Y. Okay, that's what it is. And then a law simply states what happens repetitively, even if we can't explain it. For example, the law of gravity simply means that everything we've always known, if we hold it out and we drop it, falls to the ground. That the masses attract. That we know. Why it happens, we don't know. That's a law. It's repetitive, and we can depend on it to predict the future. David Hume, a philosopher, attacked the validity of science, and without getting into a philosophical discussion too much, he said that all you can say is science, they said, predicts the future, but does it really? All it is, and he had a point, was a constant. All you're saying is that, for example, you talk about water freezing at 0 degrees Celsius, right? So it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius at sea level. All you can say is that all water that has ever been perceived at 0 degrees Celsius has frozen, and it's happening now. And I assume the future will be a constant repetition of the past, but how do you know that?
Hmm.
So again, these are all the principles of science. So science is in flux. A lot of people think, well, if science says it, no. There's a whole bunch of things. Newtonian physics were blown away by Einsteinian physics. So science is not set in stone. There are certain scientific principles, but things change. So if they're claiming that astrology is a theory, all right, what has to happen? Uh, it has to be tested and replicated, and the theory undergoes scrutiny of peer review to see if similar results can be obtained by other experimental researchers. Now, astrology claims that it can predict things and it can do things. Well, if it can affect people, if it can affect the future, if it can predict whether or not you're going to be healthy, wealthy, wise, and all this other stuff, well, then it should be replicated. And for it to be legitimate, for any theory to be legitimate, the results must have explanatory relevance. The theory must explain something, and it must be falsifiable. There's a way of proving it false. A theory that explains nothing and can never be disproven can't be considered a scientific theory.
Hmm.
All right, so the scientific method is not perfect, like I said, because people are not perfect, and every modern technological and scientific advance would have been impossible without it. It is a method that clearly works. Whether biases of modern science, whatever biases that modern science has, the role of the scientist is that of a skeptic and adversary, not accepting conformist with his personal wishes and how he wants the world to operate, as astrologers do. Concerning astrology, it's the indisputable conclusion that the scientific evidence indicates that astrology fails at everything it claims to do. To the best of my knowledge and belief, there has not been a single scientific study open to peer review that has shown astrology to effectuate any causal influence whatsoever, no influence in people, yet there have been many scientific studies that show influence is definitely lacking. I'm going to just cite two studies. In, quote, an empirical test of popular astrology, unquote, researcher Ralph Bastedo carefully analyzed the contents of astrological literature. He found that it revealed 2,375 specific adjectives for the 12 zodiac sun signs, each sign being described by about 200 adjectives. For example, a person who is a Leo is strong, domineering, tough, a born leader. A person who is a Taurus is indecisive, timid, insecure, not a leader. In Bastido's test, 1,000 people were examined for 33 variables, including physical attractiveness, leadership ability, personality traits, social and religious belief, etc. Bastido concluded that this test failed to prove any astrological prediction. He said, quote, all of our results can be attributed to random chance.
Hmm.
Right. Second, a team from the University of Manchester did a study in 2007 called 10 Million Marriages, a test of astrological love signs. That is one of the biggest reasons that people go to astrologers. They will go, it's usually the woman who goes to an astrologer and says, is my boyfriend the one for me? Am I going to marry him? How many children are we going to have? Should I marry him? Or he's asked me to marry him, and I don't know if I should do this or not. And they really go by that. Some people will only date people if they have a matching sign. Like if they're a Taurus, then they have to find someone who's a Capricorn or something. So it's sad that people do this.
It's hard enough as it is, right?
Yeah.
Hey, you look nice. I enjoy your company. You're born in May, right?
So have you just been born one day later?
Yeah, right. No.
So they did a test of astrological love signs. They analyzed 10 million marriages using census data from the United Kingdom and inferring astrological signs from couples' birth dates. Astrologists have specific ideas about which signs make the best matches. Oh, here's a couple of examples. A Sagittarius is best to marry a Leo or an Aquarius and shouldn't be with a Cancer. But the University of Manchester team found that in reality, people tended to marry others with birthdays close to their own. In fact, the number of couples with the exact same birthday was 41% higher than expected. And according to a study, two peoples under the sign of Sagittarius can be highly unpredictable, although remarkable. Yeah, so that was the claim that they tested, and they found that there was nothing to show that two Sagittarius would stay together for life or make a better pair than any other astrological sign. It turns out that these birthday pairings are probably accidents on the forms. When you take away the truth from the birthday weirdness, you wind up with no effect at all. The study concludes, here's the final analysis that was written, and I quote, this research shows that astrological sign has no impact on the probability of marrying and staying married to someone of any other sign. For decades, popular astrologers have promoted the idea of love signs, compatibility between partners with certain combinations of birthdays. If more than 20 million married people in England and Wales offer any indication, however, lonely hearts who worry about the zodiac are wasting their time. So there's no scientific proof to any of this, or the two Sagittarius people are the best love sign of all. None of this has held any scientific weight whatsoever. Now, astrologers use three common defenses against the fact there is no scientific support for what they claim. And they say, number one, scientists and most of the general populace don't understand astrology like they do, which is a form of Gnosticism. Like they're in the know, they have this secret knowledge and scientists can't access it. Second, they say science is inherently evil. And third, they say experience and testimonials prove astrology true. And Michael J.B. does the same. In his second video, he claims people against astrology, including scientists, just don't understand it. And then he says that the science was hijacked by the Enlightenment and can't be trusted, whatever that means. All right. He said, this one, I kid you not. He said, astrology can be shown true because of certain events. And he said that the Freemasons at NASA planned the launch of Apollo 11 when the moon was ascendant. And that shows the coming together of the moon and the sun, because Apollo is the name of the pagan sun god. And they did that so they could get people to watch the launch. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. He also has anecdotal testimonies, which mean absolutely nothing scientifically. Anecdotal stories, prove nothing. That's the weakest type of evidence there ever is. So that proves absolutely nothing. Now, some astrologers will claim that what they do is scientific in spite of the research being clearly against them. And there are others who are honest, who admit they deal with unseen supernatural forces, okay, to ascertain truth. If astrology is dealing with supernatural forces, read the word demons. It would account for both the accuracy of some individuals' astrological charts, readings, delineations, whatever you want to call them, and would not be subject to the scientific method, because you can't subject that to the scientific method. If astrology works via the forces of nature, it would be subject to the scientific investigation methods. A third option used by some occultists to dupe Christians is to claim astrology is supernatural, but not by Satan's doing, but by God. All right. And astrologers are either dabblers who do it for kicks and the serious who do it for money. Each category can be further divided into those who claim it works scientifically and those who assert it works supernaturally. Among those who invoke supernatural forces, some identify them as spiritual, others claim it is knowledge from the Christian God. The serious practitioners who perform astrological readings for money are, for the most part, charlatans who open themselves up to the demonic. These are just, frauds who want to make a quick buck off of people who they can dupe. And those who declare astrology science cannot prove anything. They can't produce any real research, so they fall back on one or more of the following proofs. Number one, astrology is true and good because it is found in many cultures. Well, so is worshiping idols. It doesn't make it either true or good, does it?
Right.
Second, extraterrestrial or cosmobiological influences exist. Now, scientists do agree that extraterrestrial influences exist, like the moon's influence on the tides, but the same scientists also agree that this has nothing to do with influencing human beings. And the third thing they'll say is non-astrologers are unqualified to judge astrology. But here's the thing. What qualifies you to be an astrologer?
Right. Do you go to astrology school? I don't know.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
Yes. There's wasn't the old P.T. Barnum, right? There's a sucker born every minute.
Right.
And here in New York, you can go to a professional. There's actually the American Federation of Astrologers.
Wow.
And you can become a licensed astrologer. You can even do it online now. So who qualifies as an astrologer? So before moving on to the contention that astrology can be Catholic, quote unquote, I'd like to answer the question, who qualifies as an astrologer? Because Michael J.B. calls himself an astrologer. Paradoxically, my answer is going to be nobody and everybody. Because I say no one can be a professional astrologer because astrology is not scientific or theologically supported. So a person can call himself a professional astrologer in the same way I can call myself a professional vampire hunter. Yeah.
Right.
I say anyone can be a professional astrologer because those like Michael J.B., who give readings for money, have no educational or licensing requirements. There's nothing. I'm a lawyer because I was accepted and graduated from an American Bar Association approved law school with a Juris Doctorate, JD degree. After having passed rigorous curriculum requirements for that degree, I passed the New York State Bar exam. I'm a science teacher because I have a master's degree in science education from an approved university, was observed for a year as a student teacher, and passed the New York State testing exam for my license. See, those are concrete qualifications. But here are his qualifications. Here are qualifications. So just so you know who you're dealing with. This is a Catholic astrologer. I want you to hear what his qualifications are. If you're not blown away, I don't blame you. So here it is, experience and knowledge. Number one, I have many moons of reading independently on the topics of astrology, occultism, hermeticism, and religion in general, specifically Catholicism. Independent reading on the occult and the Vatican II sect doesn't qualify somebody as any type of professional as far as I'm concerned. Second qualification, research application of astrology to my Schism 206 content on world events, social engineering, and symbolism. I don't even know what that means. I have no clue what that means. What? You might as well have said, all right. All right. Well over 100 hours of professional readings along with satisfied clients. See my testimonials section. Okay, first of all, what makes them professional?
Right.
It's a professional reading. So don't you have to get to be professional before you can do it? Why do I give professional legal advice? Because I'm qualified. You don't become professional. You don't give a professional advice in order to become a professional. You become a professional to give the professional advice. So it's kind of, putting the cart before the horse there. And did he get paid? Is that what makes it professional? Because they paid him
Right.
for it? All right. You can pay me to hunt the vampire. Uh, the satisfied clients, I'd call them fools, but, uh, and they were most likely told things that they wanted to hear. They'll tell you things like that too. Oh, Kevin, according to this reading, you're a very intelligent, good-looking man who's a great father and a great husband. Well, who's going to say no to that?
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Uh, and finally, here's his best qualification of all. This one really does it for me. Here it is. Life, its trials and tribulations, but joys and blessings as well. So
That's it.
being alive is a qualification?
But you don't have that. You don't have that on your resume.
No, I for granted that, I got a pulse and I can shake my head up and down.
Right.
So just keep waking up in the morning and you're good to go, by golly. All right, now here's what a following professional Catholic astrologer can do for you with his qualifications after you hand over $36 an hour. All right, so, all right, here we go. It says judicial is probably a misnomer for the type of natal chart analysis we do here. I don't know who we is, as it is under the umbrella of the views of Thomas Aquinas on such matters. Well, we see that Thomas Aquinas had no views on that garbage. Thus, it would be deemed a natural influence in regards to natural inclinations versus magic. See the spiritual views section below for more on these topics. However, whether or not astrology is indeed a natural phenomenon or simply functions as a Rorschach test that is devoid of any physical reality or influence, the result is the same. So wait a second. So whether it really happens or whether it's just some sort of weird psychological test, the results are the same?
Right.
Uh, at least when the proper restrictions are placed on it and it's used as a tool for self-analysis and self-reflection, this is the main approach I take. Okay. So Michael J.B. disavows divination, yet clings to the idea of natural forces influencing natural inclinations, which I have demonstrated has no scientific validity whatsoever. Right? Aquinas was operating under science as best as it was known 800 years ago. And nevertheless, even if astrology is not a natural phenomenon subject to the scientific method, we are told it functions as a Rorschach test. Now, the Rorschach test is a psychological test in which subjects' perceptions of ink blots are recorded and then analyzed using psychological interpretation, which is done by a psychologist, psychiatrist, or other licensed medical health professional. Michael J.B. doesn't pretend to have such credentials.
Right.
So even if it was a Rorschach test, it requires years of education and training to do it correctly, which he doesn't have, but he is alive. Moreover, no psychologist has ever declared that astrology charts can be used instead of ink blots for testing. So yes, you can find somebody's personality to a degree by using these Rorschach tests if you go to a professional psychologist or psychiatrist. But he's saying that an astrological chart is like the ink blot test, but no psychiatrist said there's not one that makes that claim.
Right.
So he's saying about, so how does it work like this? Well, only he knows. Worthless testimonials. Here's one such testimonial they talked about. Michael is an exceptional at his craft. As a student of the esoteric, I am often naturally skeptical of how many approach these topics. My familiarity with Michael's approach to research has alleviated these fears, and with good reason. He discussed my chart with me in a way that was both empowering and enlightening. Unlike the popularly portrayed deterministic model of astrology, Michael presented me with obstacles and assets. He was able to explain phases of my life with an eerie degree of accuracy and expose lessons I would have otherwise ignored. This is truly an exceptional service that can help anyone from the seasoned seeker to those beginning on their path. I highly suggest you book your session with him today. Signed, Ross Cessna. Astrology works when there is no demonic activity. I'll tell you why it works. Because the number one was called the Barnum effect. And it is. And it's actually called that. And yes, it comes from P.T. Barnum. And yes, I referenced him earlier in the show. And two, the inability of astrology to be falsified. According to the American Psychological Association, the Barnum effect is, quote, the tendency to believe that vague predictions or general personality descriptions, such as those offered by astrology, have a specific application to oneself, unquote.
Interesting.
So again, I'm going back, Kevin, you're handsome, you're this, you're that, and of course you're going to eat it up. Who
Right.
wouldn't? We all have egos, to one degree or another. We try as Catholics not to have a great one, but it does appeal to that.
Right.
So, oh yeah, I can see that. A coinage of the term, the Barnum effect, has been attributed to Paul Everett Meal. It alludes to the remark made by U.S. showman Phineas T. Barnum, who died in 1891, to the effect that there's a sucker born every minute. The effect was termed the fallacy of personal validation by U.S. psychologist Bertram Robin Fora, who died in the year 2000. And he studied it in 1949. Hence, Michael can present your assets and the phases of your life using generalities in the person's mind, then applies to himself. So he gives you these generalities, so general. Like, for example, I predict you're going to come into some money. Now, you're walking down the street and you find a nickel. Well, it was true.
Right.
You came into some money.
Wow.
So whether you find a nickel in the street or whether you hit the lottery, or anything in between, aha, my astrologer said so. It must apply to me. All right. The lack of falsifiability makes astrology seem to work because astrologers always have a reasonable explanation for their failures. It's kind of like meteorology, although that's a science. They always tell it was because of a certain, it was a change in the jet stream. So whenever they don't go, oh, it was a jet stream. But at least there is a jet stream, and that can happen. But here's what they say. Within astrology exists an inexhaustible reserve of material for explaining the failures of astrology without threatening astrology itself. Some of the excuses astrologers have given are, and these are actual ones that I've looked up, the client did not really know himself. The time of birth was not accurately recorded.
That's a good one.
That's the reason. Because if had it, they put 9:07 instead of 9:08 p.m., well, that throws everything off. All right. That was one that I got. Another one they gave me was this. The stars impel, they do not compel. They impel, not compel. The person's free will countered the astrological prediction because they were opposed to it. Now, you're the problem that didn't come true. And it could be from subconscious behavior. So subconsciously, you didn't want to come into money, and that's why you didn't do it. And then, of course, the client never fulfilled, this is one of my favorites, the client never fulfilled his astrological potential. I don't even know what that means.
Well, you should. I think you need to figure it out. You're missing on your potential here.
They give you 1,001 excuses except the correct one. Astrology is bunk. That's the correct answer.
Right.
So astrology now, again, is really the doorway to demons. Does the church really distinguish between good and bad astrology? One word answer, no. Astronomy is, and its scientifically valid prediction, such as the times of the tides, is not condemned. This is astrology. Astronomy. Let me get my facts straight here, because the two are so close together. Astronomy, the study of the planets and the stars, is a valid scientific endeavor subject to the scientific method and is in no way condemned by the church, was never condemned by the church. All right. With our current knowledge of science, astrology is pseudoscience, and it always involves some kind of predictions about the future. You can't escape the divination side of it.
Right.
There is no Catholic astrology any more than can be a Catholic abortion. And popular culture has for years been trying to push the idea of good and bad witches, from the Wizard of Oz to the Harry Potter series, and yet all witchcraft is evil. Michael J.B. has cited no approbation from the Vatican II sect for his so-called Catholic astrology, although they certainly won't warn against it or condemn it either. It won't be surprising before somebody gives him an imprimatur, so-called. So what does the one true church really have to say about astrology? Despite Michael J.B.'s protestations to the contrary, astrology is a type of divination, predicting the future as the Oxford Dictionary defines it. The practice, quote, the practice of seeking knowledge of the future or the unknown by supernatural means, unquote. As such, astrology falls under the prohibition of the church. According to theologians McHugh and Cowan, divination is a sin of superstition against the first commandment because, quote, a creature is given the credit of divine knowledge when instruction about hidden matters which only God could bestow asked for it, unquote. That's taken from the second volume, page 360. Furthermore, if there is no explicit invocation of the spirits of evil, the sin of its nature is mortal on account of its implicit commerce with the devil. But generally, the sin will be light on account of the dispositions of the offender. So if there's no invocation of the spirits of evil, the sin of its nature is of its nature mortal because of the implicit commerce with the devil. Just wanting to do something like this is very dangerous.
Mhm.
And it the sin will be light could be on part of the offender, such as he's ignorant, consults divination as a joke from curiosity, has no faith in it, wasn't properly told the faith, etc. Hence, now this is going back to McHugh and Cowan, hence the faithful should be warned not to go to fortune tellers and all forms of divination, it is commonly held, belong to the same species of worship of a false god. All right, and that's volume 2, 365, pages 365 and 366. So Michael J.B.'s protestation is not only talking about influences and not fatalism, is clearly condemned by Pope Sixtus V in his decree Caeli et Terrae, Heaven and Earth, promulgated January 5th, 1586. The pertinent part reads, therefore, we condemn and reject all forms of divination. By this decree, which will be forever valid, and by our apostolic authority, we decree and declare against astrologers and any others who practice the art of what is called judicial astrology, with the exception of those who make predictions in regard to agriculture, navigation, and medicine, and also against those who dare to cast and interpret people's births horoscopes with a view to foretelling future events, be these contingent, successive, or fortuitous, or actions dependent upon human will, even if the astrologer maintains or testifies that he is not saying anything for certain. Even
Wow.
if the astrologer maintains he is not saying anything for certain. So therefore, even if the comments are not certain and only influenced, it stands condemned by the church. And Michael J.B. does exactly this with his natal chart readings. It's still a form of divination and opens ones up to demonic forces. His argument that it's like reading ink blots fails miserably. He has no credentials in psychology to do so, or in psychology. And psychologists themselves never make use of star charts in place of ink blots or these delineations, astrological delineations for the Rorschach test. It would be New Age occult astrotherapy. So to put things in historical perspective, with advancement in science and the combining of astrological nonsense with legitimate astronomy, there was confusion as to what exactly was legitimate to use in regards to astrology. There were astrologers at the court of Pope Paul III, but later Pope Sixtus V, having consulted the theologians and bishops, drew the line between the legitimate ends of astronomy, still called by some astrology, and the illegitimacy of astrology, thus officially pronouncing the position of the church. And inevitably, there will be the objection that the three kings, the three magi, who went to see the birth of Christ were astrologers, and therefore astrology is permitted. The Douay-Rheims Bible gives the accurate translation of St. Matthew, the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 to 2. When Jesus, quote, when Jesus therefore was born in Bethlehem of Judah in the days of King Herod, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to adore him. According to theologian Haydock, both the Latin and the Greek text may signify wise philosophers and astronomers, which is the common exposition. There was no differentiation in those days between the legitimate study of the stars and planets, the science of astronomy, and pagan superstitious astrology. Haydock continues, they knew it was his star, either by some prophecy among them or by divine revelation. That the Magi were recipients of a private divine revelation is borne out by verse 12. Quote, and having received an answer in sleep that they should not return to Herod, they went back another way to their country, unquote. God revealed to them in their sleep they were to return another way home and not to heed the wicked King Herod. Haydock teaches, quote, some ancient interpreters think that these very men might have been magicians before their conversion, unquote. So God will sometimes reveal himself in a special way to those of goodwill. The Jewish proper diaspora began with the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC and sent them all around the Mesopotamia. Before the establishment of the Catholic Church, Judaism was the true religion, and the Magi, the wise men, were either astronomers or possibly astrologers who also learned astronomy and converted. After all, if pagans who would go looking after a god in whom they didn't, why would they go looking for a god in whom they didn't believe?
Right.
Right? So they were rewarded for their faith by God, and hence there is no Catholic astrology, nor would God reward it, contrary to what Michael J.B. and the others out there claiming to be Catholic astrologers would like you to believe. So now the dangers of astrology. There are three dangers of going to a Catholic astrology reading. Number one, astrology is dangerous because it's a lie. If astrology is not true in any sense, which it's not, then it cannot give either accurate or useful information, for a system founded upon falsehood can never generate truths. You are living a lie, and that can never be good. Number two, astrology is dangerous because it is an occult system condemned formally by the church that leads people to accept the assistance and advice of demons. If astrology functions in collaboration with demons, then it is dangerous by definition. The influence comes from the demonic, not God or science. Now, those are for the ones that do make accurate predictions. So you have the charlatans, and then you have the ones that do make some accurate predictions, but that is coming, they say, from spirit guides. And what are spirit guides? That's another word for demons. I'm not saying that Catholic astrologers do that, but some I'm told, claim that angels give them this. It's not coming from it. It's coming from an angel, but a fallen one. All right. So you are doing something sinful. The Vatican II sect does not endorse Catholic astrology, to their credit, I guess, or even attempted to define what precisely it would encompass. And third, you no longer rely on God, but the stars to tell you what to do. Traditional devotions of reliance on God, who will guide you and strengthen you, is cast aside for astrological advice. It also helps to indirectly justify sin because you couldn't resist your natural inclination to do this or that sinful act. It was written in the stars, and you couldn't overcome the influence. Kind of like the devil made me do it. Well, he did indirectly through you believing in these astrological um, delineations, these astrological charts and readings. So, in this time of great apostasy, be more careful than ever before to prudently follow the church and avoid traps from the enemy who, as we say, prowls about the world seeking the ruin of souls, as we say in the prayer to St. Michael after low mass. And the occult invasion, since the church was driven underground, does indeed show up in places you least expected, like allegedly Catholic websites with an anti-occultist trying to sell you occultism in the form of astrology and with the name of the church and St. Thomas Aquinas attached to it.
Oof, good stuff, boy. And, and I think for me, it really is kind of those creepy things that, as you say, I think a lot of it is just kind of this, you know, charade. You know, it's just kind of a scam trying to make it buck because somebody will fall for it. But then when you say, you know, someone like, you know, Obama or the Reagans had that in the Oval Office, I mean, that's pretty scary. I mean, that makes me think that, yeah, as you say, that could absolutely have something to do with the demonic. And I think that's why I think I often laugh at this type of stuff, but then there's always, or not always, but often this deeper side that is just straight up evil. And that's as you said at the end, it's something to definitely be aware of and shy away from as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Introibo, I appreciate it. That was as informative as ever. I mean, really, really interesting. And I can assure you, I will not be looking at my horoscope anytime soon after this one. I appreciate it. Anyone who, again, enjoys this podcast, there is a full playlist of our podcast on this very channel, the Catholic Family Podcast. There is a playlist of all of the different occultism videos that I've done with Introibo. And again, please go over and check out his blog, which will be attached to the show notes. He produces things every Monday. And again, just this week produced well, I guess depends on when we publish this, but yeah, it should be this week. So recently at least published something again about occultism, which I mean, as Introibo, you said yourself, opened your eyes. It opens mine as well. It's always something, isn't it? There's always something new. You sent me a list a bit ago of the things that you could talk about, you know, regarding occultism in society. And we've already done, I don't know, 7 or 8, you know, episodes. And it's pretty scary. It's pretty disturbing how big of a hold occultism has on our world.
And be vigilant. That's all I can tell you. Pray, be vigilant, stay close to the sacraments, and pray for guidance, because it does surround us like never before. And since I started doing this research, it's only proven it more and more.
Absolutely. Awesome. Introibo, thank you very much. And until next time, God bless you.
Thank you.